From the right, I'm Matt Lewis.
From the left, I'm Bill Scher.
And you're watching
The Week in Blog.
Bill, the Michael Steele machine keeps on, is the gift that keeps on giving. More news keeps trickling out about Michael Steele. They're having the Southern Republican Leadership Conference right now down in New Orleans. According to Reed Wilson, who writes for the Hotline, he also tweets at Politics Nation, reports that there's a resolution which would support Michael Steele that's being pushed by Steele's team. Newt Gingrich, again, spoke last night, I guess a couple days whenever this airs, at the SRLC, again full-throatedly supporting Michael Steele. But Bill, this week, I'm seeing no love of Michael Steele from conservative bloggers, primarily over his playing the race card. What are you seeing over on the progressive side of the aisle? Are they just getting out of the way of Steele at this point?
Oh, I think there's definitely, you see a lot of blogging on the left, hitting Steele for hypocrisy, because he had been attacking Democrats in the past about playing the race card. Let me see. Oliver Willis, Michael Steele plays race card in defense of incompetence again. I think there was something else.
This is an area where conservatives and liberals agree, almost right down the line. And by the way, you're right. I wrote at townhall.com a piece, a year or so ago, where I was on a blogger call with Michael Steele, and he said that Obama played the reverse race card masterfully. So, but we've got
this plumb line also. He had flashback. Steele said he doesn't play race game, claimed Dems do, and picked up quotes from back in November. I don't play the race card. I don't play the race game. In December, I'm kind of sick and tired of the left and Democrats in this country when they get in trouble. They play the race card, that slavery card, that civil rights card. And there also was, this isn't blogging, of course, but I think it was picked up by some bloggers on The Daily Show, Jon Stewart's excellent interview with the Michael Steele Muppet, where they brought up all these old quotes before. Because obviously on the left, there's definitely more acceptance of the general notion that race does still hold people back, even after the election of Barack Obama. On the right, it's always been a firm principle that those days are over. Don't even bring up the subject anymore. Obama's election should totally put this to rest, which Steele has often agreed with. And so it was sort of an odd moment.
Right.
The whole reason of his election to RNC chairman was to be able to show that Republicans are a diverse party now, and we're colorblind. And Steele's always been in sync with that. So why he fell back on this all of a sudden is just strange.
Well, you're right about the conservative ethos in the sense that we believe in a meritocracy. We think that it should be colorblind so that race doesn't help you or hurt you.
And the left doesn't, by the way. We reject all colorblindness.
Yes. Again, we agree. But interestingly, Joe Scarborough on Morning Joe the other day said that because Steele said that he had essentially a shorter window of error, or shorter, I forget his exact wording, but
slimmer margin.
Slimmer margin of error. Joe Scarborough actually made the argument that if Michael Steele was white, he would have already been fired for what he did, pointing to competence. And Quinn Hillier writes, Quinn Hillier at American Spectator says, apparently spending $110 million in a little over a year merits no criticism unless the chairman who spends the obscene amount of money happens to be of a darker hue. Poor Mr. Steele says he has less a margin of error because he has darker pigmentation in his skin. This is nuts. It's outrageous. He then says that the same holds true for Barack Obama, that his margin for error is less because he's black. Hot Air's Ed Morrissey went on to say, I'll go out on a limb and predict that Steele's attempt at victimhood isn't going to do anything to bolster his popularity at the RNC. Bill, something that's been missing from this is that Michael Steele is in an oblique way arguing that if you're criticizing him, you may be a racist. That's, I think, the most insulting part of this. There's a lot of good reason to criticize Michael Steele over competence. It has nothing to do with race.
Well, forgive me for defending Michael Steele. But, I mean, he definitely was trying in his comments there to not take the argument that far. You could see he was trying to be very contained in acknowledging that and not trying to, I mean, he never said the word racism.
Oh, in fact, it was a question asked of him.
Critics of his. He was trying just to say, look, this is just sort of the way of the world, and it's up to me to do a good job in effect. I don't think he was trying to shut down critics by saying that. I didn't interpret his comments that way.
And I will also concede that it's not like he brought this up on his own. The question was asked of him. Do you think?
Right, but he obviously could have answered it differently.
And he should have. And by the way, I will take issue with your point. You said the rationale for Michael Steele was that he could show diversity. That the rationale of him being the RNC chairman, maybe that was part of it. But another rationale was that this theory that the RNC chairman should be a telegenic, charismatic person who would go head to head with Barack Obama. Not the purpose of the RNC, of the RNC chairman, by the way. But it's ironic that that's really what's harmed Michael Steele, is that he simply can't shut up. He shouldn't have been doing this interview to begin with, and it's really his penchant for self-promotion, I think, more than anything that's gotten him into trouble. Interestingly,
it would just seem like the justification, the argument for him being RNC chair, which was we need to be. There was basically a debate in the RNC meeting. Do you want a real, fire-breathing right-winger, or do you want someone who is going to expand the party's base? And the choice of Steele was the latter argument.
But if they wanted both, they could have had Ken Blackwell, the guy that I was supporting, who's African American, has an incredible resume, and is more conservative than Michael Steele. So it wasn't just race. There were many factors, I would say, contributing to Steele being picked.
Well, the reason why I said Steele and not Blackwell was that Steele was going to put a less hard-edged face on the party.
Yeah, that's a good.
And regardless of whether you feel that was a good justification or not, I think it's fair to say that Steele is not expanding the base of the party right now.
Yeah,
he's just making it a mockery.
Let me say this though, and we shouldn't get into this long debate, but I do wonder if in the long run. Now, in the short run, Steele, I think, has been a disaster. But I wonder if in the long run, if he is sort of the Jackie Robinson of the Republican Party, in the sense that will merely his having been the chairman, a very high-profile, important position, will ultimately that help change the brand of the Republican Party and take it away from this kind of negative stereotype of being the party of old white men that is not inclusive. Now, look, we can go back and talk about Lincoln, the great emancipator, and by the way, it's a great segue to our next topic about McDonnell. We could talk about, a lot of folks along the way. We could talk about a Democrat, George Wallace, standing in the schoolhouse doors. For whatever reason, right now the Republicans have this, deservedly or undeservedly, this bad reputation on race. And I'm wondering if, in the long run, regardless of how Steele's tenure goes in the short run, if this isn't a step in the right direction in terms of branding the party. Maybe there's an African-American child growing up today who doesn't get into the nuance of the politics, but just turns on the TV and sees that there's an African-American Republican on TV, and maybe that says something 50 years from now. I don't know, but it's a debate worth having.
I don't recall Jackie Robinson making history by taking his baseball bat and repeatedly smashing himself in the face. That wasn't his strategy.
No, but my point would be, Jackie Robinson was a good baseball player. But he was not a great baseball player.
That's why he inspired others.
No, but my point is, and again, this, we probably don't have time to engage in, and that's not the purpose of this show anyway. But Jackie Robinson was a good baseball player. I don't think he was a great baseball player. I mean, Satchel Paige, who unfortunately was really too old by the time the league was integrated to. We don't even know how old he was. Most of his time was spent in the Negro leagues, and he was a great player, but probably way better than Jackie Robinson. He was a pitcher, so it's a little bit different. But Jackie Robinson's main contribution, I think, was breaking the color barrier. I'm just wondering if Michael Steele, if what he does is less important than the fact that he has now achieved this position. I don't know. Same thing could be said for Barack Obama, by the way. For whether you like him or not, whether you like his policies or not, it is a historic thing, and there could be very good things that come out of having him be president that have nothing to do with policy. And that was, really talked about a lot in the 2008 election cycle, obviously.
I would argue that Satchel Paige had the superior career in the Negro Leagues. But Jackie Robinson more than proved himself once he was in the major leagues.
He had
a mediocre major league career.
Jackie Robinson was a very good, above average, certainly baseball player. But I don't know that he was a great baseball player. Very good, but we can debate that.
We'll leave that debate for another time.
Very good.
But speaking of the history of race and equality in America, an interesting move by the Virginia governor, Bob McDonnell, to bring back Confederate History Month to Virginia, and in doing so, in his proclamation, make no mention of slavery in before the Civil War, which is not even something that the history of Confederate History Month in Virginia is. There are a number of governors in the past that have done the same, but even in their proclamations, they acknowledge that slavery existed and it was bad. The last two Democratic governors of Virginia, first Mark Warner, campaigned on not having Confederate History Month anymore. One election did not do it. Tim Kaine did not do it. McDonnell brings it back and forgets to even mention slavery. This has, of course, been brought up a lot in the liberal blogosphere. You have Ed Kilgore, a Democrat from the South, blogging in the New Republic, saying that many liberals will cynically conclude the whole thing was a dog whistle to the far right. But as a white Southerner old enough to remember the final years of Jim Crow, and every month was Confederate History Month, I have a better idea for McDonnell. Let's have a neo-Confederate History Month that draws attention to the endless commemorations of the lost cause that have wrought nearly as much damage as the Confederacy itself. Digby, keying off of Kilgore's post, saying, McDonnell left out slavery for obvious reasons. He left the century after the Civil War out of his declaration for the same ones. Again, pushing this point that this is in Digby's terms, the very definition of the Atwater dog whistle, to let the right-wingers in Virginia know that he's on their side. And Matt Iglesias over at the Daily Beast talked about why it's the path of political suicide, a bizarre retreat from his party's civil rights roots, which is an argument that you see Republicans. We're the party of Lincoln. Democrats had all the racists. Democrats had Robert Byrd and George Wallace and whatnot. So why is McDonnell doing this if it's not to appeal to the far right of his state? What are conservative bloggers saying about this? Are they upset with McDonnell, or are they saying, good for him, part of American history, heritage, blah, blah, blah?
Well, first of all, I would love to talk to you in depth about this because I feel it's a very nuanced position. It's being misportrayed. Having said that, conservative bloggers, well, first let me say he should have included slavery. He should have talked about the horrors of slavery.
You just cut and paste the old proclamations.
Well, I think George Allen...
Why would you strip it out?
Governor George Allen's proclamation, I don't think, mentioned slavery. Governor Jim...
Oh, maybe it was
Gilmore.
Gilmore's dead.
His dead, and then Kaine... Warner and Kaine didn't have it. But conservative...
I'd expect as much from George Allen, if I may say.
But conservative bloggers... not really on the bandwagon here. Rich Lowry at National Review says, I'm glad he apologized. Powerline's Paul Mirengoff writes, McDonnell did not rescind his original proclamation, nor in my eyes should he have. As I argued earlier today, the omission of slavery from the proclamation was an outrage. I'm happy that McDonnell has realized his error, apologized for it, and fixed the proclamation. Commentaries Jennifer Rubin. Politicians, even smart and competent ones, still manage to ensnare themselves in the politics of race. The best they can do when it happens is to follow McDonnell's lead, cut your losses, apologize, and move on. And Hot Air's Ed Morrissey says, as a history buff myself, I agree that it's important to study history, but that does not require a Confederacy Appreciation Month, which is what this sounds like. McDonnell could
Morrissey's actually opposing McDonnell across the board on it.
Well, he says McDonnell could have broadened the perspective to a Civil War History Month, which would have allowed for all of the issues in the nation's only armed rebellion to be studied.
That's what President Obama said to ABC yesterday. So Obama and Morrissey agree.
Yeah, and I mean Ed Morrissey is very interesting because he really transcends the this or that sort of partisan debates and just says what things ought to be instead. And I find him an interesting read. But in any event, putting this in context, Virginia has all of these months. Right now it's like Organ Donor Appreciation Month. It's also Child Safety Month or something like that. And I'm sure that Bob McDonnell didn't realize this was going to blow up. He may have delegated this to staff members. We don't know. Certainly you can't say you did, because that's an admission that you weren't paying attention to everything.
But you don't think that, something as hot-button as Confederate history, everyone knows it's hot-button, regardless of what side you are on it. You think it would just sort of cross his desk, you sign his name and go about your business, not thinking about what the ramifications are going to be?
Well, maybe that's bad staff work, but Mark Amender had something up on Atlantic yesterday about how if you're surrounding yourself with, and I don't know that this is the case, but if you're surrounding yourself with a bunch of, let's say, like Southern kind of Virginians who aren't as sensitive to political correctness, maybe you would. Maybe that's an argument to have diverse people staffing your administration or advising you. But it's such an in-depthful and nuanced argument, and I do believe that I'm with the majority of conservative bloggers. I think he should have acknowledged slavery in this. And frankly, maybe you don't need to call it Confederacy Month, Appreciation Month or whatever. But the sacrifice of Virginians during the Civil War, I think, is fitting and appropriate to recognize and honor. And but you just have to do it in a certain way. I do.
It just seems bizarre to me that McDonnell won his election by really downplaying hot-button issues like this and being laser-focused on the economy and jobs.
Exactly.
And that's going to be a model for Republicans to kind of get their footing back after the political hits they took in 2008. Why veer off of that track? You don't have to do this.
No, and he can't be reelected anyway. He could run for Senate or something.
But he can run for other offices.
In Virginia, you can't succeed yourself in the governorship, which is
he must be thinking about senator.
I'm sure.
I'd assume almost every Virginia governor does.
I'm sure he is, but I think the people who think that he was look, this is his first. He's got 3 more years. 3.5 more years as governor. The people who think this was some sort of a cynical play to the base to help his reelection chances, it's not. He wouldn't, if he was going to pander to anybody, now wouldn't be the time to do it. It's not an obvious political play anyway.
Well, couldn't you pander now because you got some other things in mind that might piss them off later?
No, look, you never put it past a politician to pander, but this doesn't strike me as an issue of pandering. I think it's a very complex and nuanced position, and I do think that unfortunately it's been misportrayed in this debate. People like to simplify things, but without getting too much into it, the Civil War was fought over a wide variety of issues, including slavery, which, we always knew, the Founding Fathers knew that this was going to be a big issue. Thomas Jefferson said it was like holding a wolf by the ears, and you couldn't let go of it, but you couldn't hold on to it. They knew that this was going to be an issue that was going to have to be probably fought out, unfortunately. But it's not like, people who say the Civil War was fought over slavery ignore the fact that Abraham Lincoln himself said, if I could preserve the Union by freeing some of the slaves, I would. If I could preserve the Union by freeing none of the slaves, I would. If I could preserve the Union by freeing some of the slaves and keeping some in captivity, I would. So it's a very complex issue, and I fear that we are ignoring history in some ways too. Again, doesn't change the fact that Bob McDonnell should have recognized slavery in doing this. But what I do fear is that we're getting a very simplistic and incorrect view of history when we have this debate, and I'm not sure that we've learned anything else about this other than that you got to be more sensitive when you're. But here's I think the political lesson from this is, I think 10 years ago this might have been a minor ordeal. Maybe it would have been the Washington Post, and a couple of days later it would have gone away. This has hounded Bob McDonnell for a week now. And I think it's because if you're the governor of Virginia, you're now essentially a national figure, and the blogs and cable TV are going to pick up on anything you do, any gaffe you make. I think he did the right thing by, amending his resolution.
Speaking of issues that get oversimplified,
they all do nowadays.
The president, Obama, signed a nuclear treaty agreement with Russia, and I think in most foreign policy circles this has been seen as a positive thing, maybe not revolutionary. Fred Kaplan at Slate said, the actual 49-page report is neither dramatic nor ho-hum. President Obama said it takes specific and concrete steps to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy. That's the most that can be said for it, but that's hardly trivial. So he's saying, it's a good thing, but it's not, it's not wiping nuclear weapons off the face of the planet in a matter of a week. But you've had this reaction in some corners of the right that this is part of the Obama surrender agenda, and one clip on Fox News that got attention in liberal blogosphere was a Fox News teaser from anchor Megyn Kelly previewing a segment about the deal, that ended with a mushroom clap. So let me just quickly grab the actual line that was said. I apologize, I don't have it in front of me.
Well, while you're doing that, let me give you just one from Dan Reel. He says, screw Jimmy Carter, it's George McGovern time now.
Right. So on Fox it said, critics are asking, will the New Deal leave the U.S. defenseless until it's too late? And then the mushroom cloud explodes, and Dan Reel's argument is along the same vein. What is so is a widespread conservative blogosphere to take this notion that a minor change in our posture with Russia, which many people are even saying is going to help us, having a strong relationship with Russia is going to help counter the nuclear threat of Iran? Why is there and that it's in sync with what Reagan did with Russia, what Eisenhower would have wanted? Why take this very instinctually negative and cynical stance towards it?
Well, I think the sticking point, Bill, is what's really gotten people angered is this notion that you wouldn't respond to a biological or chemical attack, that you would telegraph that you wouldn't respond to a biological or chemical attack with nukes. Roger L. Simon.
That's not. You wouldn't respond to an attack.
Roger, well,
so you might not use nuclear weapons.
But by this logic, we wouldn't. By this logic, we wouldn't. I mean, Harry Truman couldn't have bombed Nagasaki, Hiroshima under this premise. And Roger L. Simon at Pajamas Media says, our president is abandoning the nuclear deterrent adhered to by every president since Harry Truman. By the way, Roger Simon, for those who don't know, he's at Pajamas Media. I don't know. Did you know that he was a screenwriter who did Bustin' Loose with Richard Pryor and Scenes from a Mall with Woody Allen and Bette Midler?
That's exactly why I'm turning to him for my nuclear policy knowledge.
He is now and he's done a lot of other stuff, but he's now a conservative blogger. I got to hang out with him down in Texas.
Aren't you sick of Hollywood always telling us what to do, man?
He was on the Adam Carolla podcast the other day too, which I love. But Eric Erickson writes, signaling to our enemies that we will not punch back as hard as we can. We'll just embolden them. Right-wing news, John Hawkins, Barack Obama is a sniveling, wimpy sissy in chief. Jennifer Rubin, if this is really the course Obama intends to pursue, Americans may well conclude he is making them and our allies less safe. And Ala Pundit at Hot Air writes, in limiting the nuclear deterrent to nuclear weapons instead of WMD generally, doesn't this create an incentive to focus on developing bio and chemical weapons? In most cases, they are less dangerous than nukes, but nukes are also harder to develop and more easy to monitor. Do we really want... essentially, he's making the argument that now there's an incentive for people to create bio and chemical weapons. So that's the take, and that's a sticking point. For
we just had a war with Iraq, which was centered on the premise that Iraq was developing WMD, and we did not drop nukes on them. Our conservatives saying George Bush let us down and we showed America to be weak because he didn't drop a nuke on Iraq and just had one of those regular old wars. I mean, you could still have responses.
Well, look. Here's my take, Bill. If America were to make a internal decision that if someone were to attack us with chemical weapons, we're not going to nuke them, I might disagree, but that's one thing. But to telegraph to the world for no reason.
Well, there is a reason.
I would argue no, but I mean I understand that they think there's a reason.
You might disagree with the reason, but it's not just out of the blue. I mean, there is a strategy here.
I want them to think
the threat of rogue states like Iran, North Korea, and if you can get Russians' buy-in around this sort of plan to get their cooperation for sanctions, that's a reason.
I want people to think that if they poison the water supply in New York City, we might nuke them. I feel safer if they think that. Maybe we won't. But if they think there's a chance we might, I like that. And I just don't understand. Look, and what I'm really sick of is this idea that Ronald Reagan would have supported what Barack Obama is talking about. Ronald Reagan did envision a world where nuclear weapons would be irrelevant, but his way of achieving that was peace through strength, and not peace by unilateral disarmament or some sort of treaty with people who were going to continue to ignore the treaties anyway. So in any event, this is a hot button issue. It got off to a slow start, though, interestingly. There was not a huge backlash or uproar over this initially. I think it took conservatives a couple days to become as outraged as they have become.
So do you think, I mean, I do have to jump in. I'm sorry, this is a shorter week than we usually have. I like to spend more time with you, Matt.
Hey, we do the podcast.
In case people did not hear, Matt was on my show last week. You can get cash@liberalvoices.com. I did his show later in the week at mattlewis.org.
When are we going to do the college tour, Bill, where we just go out on the road, a couple stools, you know?
That would be delightful. Let's say that this bank shot works, and sanctions do get applied to Iran, and Iran is forced to change its behavior. Do you think conservatives would say, okay, I got that one wrong, Obama's play worked, or would we just hear Obama's now surrendering to Iran and Iran's going to now double trick us or something?
Honestly, I think most conservatives will reflexively oppose whatever Obama wants to do, whether it works or not, just like Democrats did that to Bush and Reagan. That's just how the game is played. But ultimately, when your ideas win and when they prevail, eventually the world comes, and even public opinion and the country comes to rally around you. Just like people have now generally accepted the fact that Ronald Reagan was a great president and that he was right. You don't find a lot of Democrats or liberals today saying he was wrong. At the time they did, and it took 20 years or so for people to kind of come to that conclusion. But having said that, there are some conservatives who would concede, well, look, we were wrong, Obama was right. But I'm very skeptical that his plan will cause this entirely hostile Iranian regime to come along and play nice. I would love to be surprised. I would love it if Barack Obama proved me wrong, and if his strategy, defying everything we know about history and deterring tyrants and hostile regimes, actually worked. I hope it does. I hope I'm proven wrong.
On that open note, we should call it a week.
Yes.
Is that all right?
Good talking to you, Bill. People check us out on Twitter at The Weekend Blog, Facebook.com/The Weekend Blog. Don't forget, you can listen to this show on iTunes as well. They podcast this, search for Blogging Heads. Bill, thank you for all you do, and we'll see you next week.
And check out Matt's post this week about the congressional primary in Hawaii. It's not primary; it's a special election.
Yeah, very odd election. Very odd election.
The Democrats might split the vote and elect a Republican in what is generally a Democratic state because they can't get their act together and pick one guy to support. Matt did some really good reporting on that.
Thank you, Bill. It is a fascinating race to watch. There is no primary.
So that's a Politics Daily?
Politics Daily. We'll put up a link.
All right. Have a good weekend, Matt.
All right, have a good one. Aloha.
Take care.